Jake Miller thought it was just another ordinary morning on his struggling farm until a mysterious sound led him deep into the hay barn. There, nestled in the golden straw, he discovered something that would change his life forever. A tiny creature no bigger than a golf ball, with shimmering pink and white feathers, and the most extraordinary eyes he'd ever seen. Enormous, dark, and ancient-looking, those eyes stared up at him with a wisdom that seemed impossible for such a small being. Jake had no idea what he was holding in his weathered hands, but when he rushed the mysterious creature to the local veterinarian, her reaction was one he would never forget. And neither would the world, once they learned the shocking truth about his incredible discovery. The 20-minute drive to Dr. Sarah Chen's veterinary clinic felt like hours as Jake cradled the tiny creature against his chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat through the soft flannel shirt he'd wrapped around it. The little animal had grown quieter during the ride, those massive eyes occasionally blinking up at him with what seemed like trust. Jake found himself talking to it softly, the way he used to talk to his wife during her final days in the hospital. Words of comfort that were as much for himself as for the fragile life in his care. Dr. Chen had been the town's only veterinarian for 15 years, and Jake had brought her everything from sick cattle to injured raccoons. She was known for her calm demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge of local wildlife. Nothing ever seemed to surprise her. But when Jake walked through her clinic doors that morning, carefully unwrapping his mysterious find, Dr. Chen's composed expression cracked for the first time in her career. "My God," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her examination gloves. "Jake, where exactly did you find this?" The creature sat perfectly still in Jake's palm, those enormous eyes moving between the two humans, as if it understood the gravity of the moment. Dr. Chen leaned in closer, her professional training taking over as she began her examination. She checked the tiny talons, the downy feathers, the distinctive beak shape. With each passing moment, her expression grew more incredulous. "This is impossible," she murmured, reaching for a thick reference book from her shelf. She flipped through pages frantically, comparing what she saw with detailed illustrations of various bird species. Finally, she stopped on a page that made her face go pale. "Jake," Dr. Chen said slowly, looking up from the book with wide eyes. "This isn't just any baby bird, based on the feather patterns, the eye structure, and these distinctive markings." She paused, as if afraid to say the words out loud. "I believe you found a baby burrowing owl. But that's not the incredible part. According to every record we have, burrowing owls haven't been seen in this region for over 50 years. They were declared locally extinct in 1973. Jake stared at her, not fully comprehending what she was telling him. "So you're saying this little guy is... what? Some kind of ghost?" "I'm saying," Dr. Chen continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "that if I'm right about what this is, you may have just discovered proof that a species we thought was gone forever has somehow returned to our area. This could be the most significant wildlife discovery in our state's history." The tiny owl chose that moment to let out another of its haunting calls, as if it understood the importance of its very existence. Dr. Chen immediately reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed a number. "I need to call Dr. Martinez at the State Wildlife Department," she explained to Jake, "and probably the university. Jake, I need you to understand something. Once word gets out about this discovery, your life is going to change dramatically. There will be scientists, reporters, government officials. Everyone is going to want to know where you found this owl, and more importantly, whether there might be others." Jake looked down at the tiny creature that had somehow found its way into his barn, into his life, at the exact moment when he needed a miracle most. The foreclosure notice was still sitting on his kitchen table, but suddenly that seemed like a problem from another lifetime. "What happens to the little guy?" Jake asked, gently stroking the owl's soft feathers with one finger. "First, we need to make sure it's healthy and can survive," Dr. Chen replied, setting up a small warming station. "But Jake, if this really is what I think it is, this owl isn't just a baby bird. It's living proof that nature can heal itself in ways we never imagined, and your farm might be the key to understanding how." As if summoned by their conversation, Jake's phone began buzzing with an unknown number. Dr. Chen must have already made her call. Within minutes, it seemed like half the scientific community would be descending on their small town, all because of one tiny creature with impossibly large eyes that had chosen to appear in a pile of hay on the darkest morning of Jake Miller's life. The little owl blinked slowly, those ancient eyes seeming to hold secrets that would soon captivate the world. Neither Jake nor Dr. Chen could have predicted that by evening their discovery would be trending on social media, making national news, and setting in motion a chain of events that would transform not just their lives, but the entire future of wildlife conservation in their region. But first, they had to make sure their tiny miracle would survive long enough to tell its extraordinary story. Within 6 hours of Dr. Chen's phone call, Jake's quiet farm had been transformed into something resembling a small city. News vans lined his gravel driveway, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters stood in his front yard, speaking earnestly into cameras while gesturing toward his barn. Scientists in khaki uniforms huddled around laptops, analyzing photographs of the tiny owl and comparing them to decades-old field guides. Dr. Elena Martinez from the State Wildlife Department had arrived with a team of ornithologists, each more excited than the last about the implications of Jake's discovery. They had confirmed Dr. Chen's initial assessment. The creature was indeed a baby burrowing owl, a species that had vanished from the region when the last of the prairie grasslands were converted to agriculture in the 1970s. Mr. Miller, Dr. Martinez explained as they stood in his kitchen, the tiny owl now resting comfortably in a specialized incubator they'd brought from the university. Your discovery raises some profound questions. How did this owl end up on your property? Are there others? And most importantly, what conditions on your land made it possible for this species to return? Jake watched through his window as more vehicles pulled up his driveway. A van from the National Geographic Society had just parked next to a truck from the local television station. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since noon, with calls from wildlife magazines, documentary filmmakers, and even a Hollywood producer who wanted to buy the movie rights to his story. I just want to make sure the little guy is okay, Jake said simply, though his mind was racing with everything Dr. Martinez had told him about the potential value of his land as a wildlife habitat. That's when Marcus Webb arrived. Webb was a land developer from the city, sharp-suited and smooth-talking, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been trying to buy Jake's farm for months, offering just enough to pay off the bank, but not enough for Jake to start over anywhere else. Now, Webb pushed through the crowd of reporters like a shark cutting through water, his expression grim. Jake, Webb said, cornering him near the barn. We need to talk, privately. Doctor, Martinez tried to intervene, but Webb held up a hand. This is business, not science. Jake, I'm prepared to triple my original offer. Cash. Today. You sign the papers, and you can walk away from all this circus. Jake looked at the man who had been circling his property like a vulture for months, then back at the scientists who were treating his tiny owl like the most precious treasure in the world. Why the sudden rush, Marcus? Webb's smile faltered slightly. Jake, once the government gets involved, and they will, your land is going to be tied up in environmental reviews and protected habitat designations for years. You'll never be able to sell it, and you sure as hell won't be able to develop it. Take my offer now, and you can start fresh somewhere else. But Jake was beginning to understand something that Webb clearly didn't. The tiny creature they'd found wasn't just a baby bird. It was a symbol of hope, of nature's resilience, of the possibility that even things we thought were lost forever could find their way home. And his struggling farm wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It might be the key to bringing back an entire ecosystem. I need time to think, Jake said finally. Webb's expression hardened. Jake, I'm trying to help you here. Once these tree huggers get their claws into your land, you'll be lucky if you can afford to keep the lights on, let alone save the farm. That evening, as the crowd finally began to thin, Jake sat alone in his barn with Dr. Chen and the tiny owl. The little creature had been fed and examined by the best wildlife experts in the state, and the verdict was encouraging. It was healthy, growing stronger by the hour, and showing all the signs of a baby owl that would soon be ready to explore the world. Jake, Dr. Chen said softly. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Martinez said earlier, about your land being special. I think I know why this owl appeared here, of all places." She pulled out her tablet and showed him aerial photographs of the surrounding area. "Your farm is one of the last pieces of property in this region that hasn't been completely developed or converted to industrial agriculture. You still have those patches of native prairie grass, the old oak trees, the natural water sources. Without realizing it, you've been maintaining exactly the kind of habitat that burrowing owls need to survive." Jake studied the photographs, seeing his land through new eyes. What he'd always thought of as the neglected parts of his property, the areas too rocky or uneven to farm effectively, were actually pristine examples of the ecosystem that had existed here for thousands of years. "So this little one didn't just randomly end up in my barn," Jake mused. "It found its way to one of the few places left where it could actually survive." "Exactly. And Jake, if there's one, there might be others. A breeding population could still exist somewhere in the area, and your farm might be their best hope for recovery." The tiny owl looked up at them with those enormous, knowing eyes, and Jake could swear it understood every word they were saying. Tomorrow, he would have to make the most important decision of his life. Take Webb's money and walk away, or trust that protecting this miraculous little creature might somehow save both the owl and his farm. But tonight, he simply sat in his barn, watching over the most extraordinary thing he had ever found, and wondering if miracles really did come in the smallest packages. The answer came at dawn the next morning, when Jake discovered he and his tiny owl weren't alone. Walking out to check on the creature before the scientists arrived, Jake heard something that made his heart skip a beat. The same haunting call that had led him to the first owl, but this time coming from multiple directions. Following the sounds across his property, Jake found himself at the edge of the old prairie section, where native grasses swayed in the morning breeze. There, perched on a weathered fence post, was an adult burrowing owl, and 50 yards away, another. As Jake's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he began to count. 4, 6, 8 owls scattered across his land, all calling to each other in their mysterious language. The baby in his barn hadn't been lost or abandoned. It had been part of a family, a community that had quietly returned to the only place left where they could call home. When Dr. Martinez and her team arrived an hour later, their excitement was infectious. Using special equipment, they were able to locate 3 active burrows on Jake's property, suggesting a breeding population that could potentially restore the entire species to the region. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Martinez said, barely able to contain her enthusiasm, "this is unprecedented. Not only has the species returned, but they've established what appears to be a thriving colony on your land. With proper protection and management, this could be the foundation for recovering burrowing owls throughout their historic range." That's when Marcus Webb returned, this time with lawyers and legal documents, demanding to know why Jake hadn't responded to his offer. His face went white when he saw the extent of the scientific operation now established on the property. "Jake, you're making a huge mistake," Webb hissed. "These people are going to turn your farm into some kind of nature preserve. You'll be broke within a year." But Jake was looking at something Webb couldn't see. The tiny owl he'd rescued, now strong enough to perch on his finger, its enormous eyes bright with health and curiosity. In the distance, adult owls called to each other across land that had been in Jake's family for 3 generations. "Dr. Martinez," Jake said slowly, "what would happen if we did establish some kind of protected habitat here, hypothetically speaking?" "Well," she replied, glancing meaningfully at Webb, "there are several federal and state programs that provide financial support for landowners who preserve critical wildlife habitats. Between conservation easements, research partnerships with universities, and ecotourism opportunities, you could potentially earn more from protecting the land than you ever could from selling it." Webb's face was now purple with rage. "This is ridiculous. Jake, you can't seriously be considering turning down a guaranteed payday for some fantasy about bird watching." Jake looked down at the tiny owl on his finger, then out across his land where its family was building a new future. He thought about his wife, who had loved every wildflower and bird song on their property. He thought about his grandfather, who had bought this land with the dream of passing it down through generations. "Marcus," Jake said finally, "I think it's time for you to leave." As Webb stormed off, muttering threats about legal action and lost opportunities, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for his own future, but for the miraculous creatures that had chosen his land as their sanctuary. The tiny owl let out a soft call, as if approving of his decision. In the distance, its family called back, a sound that spoke of ancient wisdom, resilience, and the quiet miracle of second chances. Jake Miller had walked into his barn looking for hay and found something far more valuable: proof that even in the darkest times, nature finds a way to heal, to return, and to remind us that the most important things in life are not the ones that can be bought and sold. The little guardian with the enormous eyes had shown him that sometimes the smallest discoveries lead to the biggest changes, and that protecting something precious is always worth more than profiting from its destruction. As the sun rose over his land, now officially designated as a critical habitat for endangered species, Jake smiled and whispered to his tiny friend, "Welcome home, little guardian. Welcome home."